Alright, listen. My name is not Pogobro.
Poggers.
I wouldn't use a cringy Twitch emote in my name, and neither should you. It's Pogo. No, not the stick. It's Pogo in reference to one of the best mechanics ever created in gaming. The nail pogo from Hollow Knight. Now, a lot of people like to call a game a Hollow Knight clone when they see it has a pogo mechanic, but the fact is, Hollow Knight didn't invent this. It wasn't the first to use it, however I do think it's got the best implementation of the mechanic we have seen so far. Perhaps the first major use of this mechanic was in the January 1987 release of Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link. This game is actually one of the main inspirations for Hollow Knight, so it shouldn't be surprising to see that they shared similar mechanics. The down stab in Zelda 2 is an unlockable move, and helps in many of the same ways that the pogo in Hollow Knight does, largely being used as a defensive maneuver to reposition while also dealing damage. Another big example of a pogo is in the 1989 platformer DuckTales, and this one worked a bit differently. It was easier to pull off as you simply had to hold the down button and you would automatically bounce off enemies and objects. And this was the main inspiration for the pogo that we see in Shovel Knight. While I prefer the more skill and timing based version of Hollow Knight, Shovel Knight is still an amazing game that you all should play. So how does the pogo in Hollow Knight work exactly? It's very simple. You attack downward while in the air. Wow, so easy, such a basic move. So why is it so great? Honestly, there are many reasons. Firstly, it's your main defensive move. Most 2D games with a focus on combat and bosses have an iframe dodge roll as the main form of defense. This is generally, at least to me, a boring decision and makes most encounters feel samey. The Knight doesn't get iframes till way late in the game, and even then they are not infinite and are honestly a secondary move in the Knight's defensive arsenal. The pogo is great because it both allows you to dodge an enemy attack while also still dealing damage, keeping the aggressive combat feel going even when you're trying to be defensive. One of the best decisions made by Team Cherry was to not only let you pogo off enemies, but also off their weapons or just parts of the arena. This creates tons of great clutch moment feelings, where you jump wrong or dash too early, but at the last second you bounce off an enemy projectile or the spikes on the floor to negate any damage and keep you going right back into the fight. If all you did was dodge roll back and forth between the enemy, the boss design couldn't be as complex as it is, nor would the combat, simple as it may be, still feel fresh even at the final stages of endgame content with over 40 bosses. So many games have instant death spikes that we have been trained to fear them and to be cautious around them. Hollow Knight makes the best design decision to just let you pogo off spikes. This allows for some amazing platforming sections, but also lets them spice up the combat by making arenas more deadly. Combine all of this with the fact that they aren't instant death spike pits and you get a system that feels rewarding to master, but not frustrating or time wasting if you mess up. Let's take a look at the early game of Hollow Knight. You start the game being able to move, jump once with decent air control, and swing in 4 directions. And that's it. The combat would be so boring early on if you didn't have the pogo. Bouncing off of enemies' heads, chaining multiple bounces in a row, using spikes to reach a collectible, the entire first area of the game is trying to help you understand how to survive, so that by the time you reach the first real challenge of the game in Hornet Protector, you can start engaging in the real combat. One of the coolest moments in the early game is learning that you can pogo off of Hornet's Needle. It's a really simple move, and honestly, not even difficult to pull off. But doing it feels amazing. It makes you feel like a god at the game. And then you fight the Mantis Lords, and learn to pogo off of their javelin throws for a nice Soul Blast setup, or bounce off a balloon to gain height on Lostkin for a dark dive. It's all a steady progression that's having you use the same move, but in different ways and for different reasons. The fact that it's timing based means it's not a mindless action like how it feels in Shovel Knight. It's something you have to actively learn to use at the start, but by the end of the game, it feels like a natural move, like landing perfect deflects in Sekiro. Another great thing about the pogo is the sequence breaking. Early on in Forgotten Crossroads, there is a grub in a seemingly unreachable place. But if you lure one of the Vengefly enemies over to it, you can pogo off its head and reach the reward early. An even bigger example is still in Crossroads. Normally you access Brooding Moloch with a wall jump, but if you time your pogo attacks properly, you can bounce up and over the wall and fight him as your very first boss. In fact, Moloch is a fun and pretty intense fight if you do it early. Having only the pogo and spacing to stay alive really pushes the normally easy fight into something challenging and unique. Doing this sequence break early gives you a mask shard, which means you can gain an extra HP point before ever leaving the crossroads. Sequence breaks like this are great, allowing you to gain a power spike after overcoming an optional challenge. One of the biggest sequence breaks the Pogo is used for is to gain access to the Watcher Knight's fight early. At the bottom of the tower, there is a breakable object in the background, and if you Pogo off it just right, you can reach an area that normally requires a double jump to reach. This is great. Discovering ways to use a simple mechanic for something non-standard makes the player feel smart, and feeling smart then further encourages them to try even more things out with this mechanic. So the combat and sequence breaking are great, but what about for just the general gameplay, the exploring and the platforming aspect? Many Hollow Knight players will say that the platforming is basic, and you don't really get tested until the optional late game areas in the White Palace. I highly suggest watching speedruns. The Pogo makes traversal lightning quick and very fluid. Hitting jumps and bouncing off enemies to keep speed and perfectly pass through a zone is just a joy to experience, and I think this whole feeling is a large reason the speedrun community for this game is as popular as it is. The platforming might not feel like a Celeste level at all times, but it's still very precise and still lets the player excel at it when they want to. You know that feeling you get in like an FPS game? When you hit that headshot and the sound effect plays perfectly, there's a little bump of adrenaline, a feeling of, heck yeah, I am so cracked at this game. That's basically the feeling of pulling off a Pogo almost every time you do it. There is something so satisfying about being able to interact with the world in such a unique way. Having such a simple mechanic evolve with you and change how you play throughout the course of the game is an awesome way to give players that sense of accomplishment and pride. The animation is quick, the feedback is great, and it just feels badass to pull off. Hollow Knight is very much a skill-based game, and learning to use the Pogo to its fullest is a huge part of gaining mastery over the system. At least for me, it really is my favorite game mechanic. What do you guys say? Is the Pogo in Hollow Knight something you ever put much thought into? Let me know what you think about it in the comments. I like to feature cool indie games on the channel and help them get exposure that they might not normally get. Fans of skill-based action games like Hollow Knight might actually be very interested in this cool game running a Kickstarter at the moment. Kloa, Child of the Forest. This game is taking more of a Zelda-like approach, but I can see Hyper Light Drifter inspiration in the combat, which is a very good system to pull from. The visuals and story are mainly inspired by Studio Ghibli, and even the alpha footage in the trailer already looks quite good. Combat will be a mix of dodging, parrying, spacing, and using ranged attacks and spells to get the advantage over your opponent. The Zelda-likes are generally more casual games, but I have talked with the developers and they have stated that making the game fair, but with plenty of challenge, is the goal. So this one seems right up my alley. Even if you don't want to back it, both visiting the page and following the project will help get Kloa more exposure. And getting exposure is really the final boss for indie developers. Thanks so much for watching, and if you like this type of video, please subscribe to see plenty more like it.